In the heart of a blizzard, a girl vanished without a trace, and only a shadow in the snow remembered where she belonged. No one heard him bark. No one saw him leave. But he returned, 3 winters later, to guide her home. This is the story of a lost child, a silent guardian, and a town that learned what it means to be found. The wind swept down from the Colorado Rockies like a force of memory, churning snow across the narrow highway that curled its way toward the town of Silverpine. It was early January, and the first storm of the new year had already buried the ridges in waist-deep powder. The trees lining the mountain pass stood heavy with snow, their limbs drooping as if wearied by the weight of silence. As the Bennett silver SUV crested the final rise before the descent into town, the rooftops of Silverpine appeared below like a scattering of gingerbread houses coated in sugar. Ethan Bennett tightened his grip on the steering wheel. At 39, Ethan carried the quiet intensity of a man who had spent the last few years living with regret. He was tall, with broad shoulders and a lean build that once looked at home in hiking gear and flannel, now subdued beneath a charcoal parka. His brown hair had begun to thin at the crown, and fine lines webbed from the corners of eyes that had seen too many yesterdays replayed like reruns. He was a wildlife biologist by training, and a photographer by passion, though both careers had taken a back seat since the day everything began to unravel. Beside him sat Grace Bennett, 37, her profile turned toward the window, eyes fixed on the frost-laced pine trees. Grace had always been composed, the sort of woman who made chaos orderly. She was of medium height, slim with elegant features that hinted at a youthful softness once vibrant but now hardened by grief and exhaustion. Her hair, once a vibrant copper, was pulled into a low, utilitarian bun, revealing a pale face and downturned lips that rarely smiled anymore. A kindergarten teacher by profession, Grace was gentle with children but less forgiving with adults, especially herself. The loss of their dog, Ranger, 3 years ago during a summer trip to Silverpine, had marked the beginning of a rift that only widened with time. In the back seat, their daughter Lila hummed softly to herself. At 7 years old, Lila was a sunbeam bundled in a puffer jacket, her chestnut curls escaping from beneath a knitted beanie patterned with white wolves. Her hazel eyes, Grace's eyes, were wide with wonder as the forest passed by. Her nose nearly touched the window. She had never fully understood why her parents fought so often or why their once laughing home had become quiet and still. But she remembered Ranger, the big German shepherd with the intelligent eyes and the way he would nudge her gently with his nose until she giggled. In Lila's mind, Silverpine was where she had last seen him, and where she believed he might still be. "Are we almost there?" Lila asked, voice muffled through her scarf. "Almost, sweetheart," Ethan replied, eyes catching hers in the rearview mirror. He offered a tired smile. Grace shifted in her seat, adjusting her coat with a brisk motion. "Cabin 8. Still at the far end, right?" Ethan nodded. "Where the property meets the forest line. Frank said he kept it reserved for us." Frank Wilson had owned the Mountain Ridge cabins for 30 years. A wiry man with sharp eyes and sun-worn skin, Frank had seen more families come and go than anyone in Silverpine. He didn't ask questions when the Bennetts called last month. Just confirmed the booking with a tone that said he remembered everything, but wouldn't bring it up. When they pulled into the lot, snow was already falling again, thick and slow. The sky was leaden. Grace exited the car first, pulling her coat tightly as she surveyed the rows of cabins. Frank emerged from the main lodge, wiping his hands on a red flannel shirt. "Ethan. Grace. Lila. Good to see you folks again. Cabin 8's ready. Firewood stacked out back." "Thanks, Frank," Ethan said, shaking the older man's hand. Grace gave a polite nod. Lila waved shyly. The cabin looked almost unchanged, its pine siding weathered but welcoming. It stood at the edge of the resort grounds, beyond which the forest loomed, ancient and indifferent. Snow had begun to gather on the porch railings, the same place Ranger had once sat like a sentry. Inside, the air was warm with the faint scent of cedar. The fireplace was already prepped with kindling. On the mantel sat a photograph, left, perhaps, deliberately. It showed the Bennetts 3 years ago. Ethan, Grace, Lila at age 4, and between them, the proud form of Ranger. His ears were alert, one tipped forward slightly. His eyes glowed with quiet wisdom. Lila rushed to the photo. "Look, it's Ranger," she said, beaming. Grace and Ethan exchanged glances. For a moment, neither spoke. Later, as night settled over Silverpine, Lila pressed her nose to the cold glass of the cabin window, watching snowflakes spiral in the yellow porch light. "I think he's out there," she whispered. Grace looked up from the stove where she was unpacking groceries. "Who, honey?" "Ranger," Lila said, eyes still searching the woods. "I think he never left." Ethan crouched beside her. "You remember where he used to chase snowballs, right?" Lila nodded. "He liked that spot by the big pine tree." Grace's voice was gentle but firm. "It's been 3 years, sweetie. If he were here, we would have seen him." Lila turned to her father. "But what if he's waiting?" Ethan hesitated. "Maybe," he said quietly. "Maybe he is." That night, as the wind howled across the mountain ridge, Lila tucked herself into the loft bed above the fireplace. The shadows of branches flickered across the cabin walls. Downstairs, Ethan and Grace sat on opposite sides of the fire, the silence between them thick with memories. Outside, just beyond the tree line, fresh snow covered a set of prints. Large, four-toed, unmistakable. A German shepherd's tracks. The snow began in earnest just after midnight. By morning, Silverpine lay buried under a fresh blanket nearly 2 feet thick, and it was still falling in heavy, relentless flurries. The pine trees outside cabin 8 stood like silent sentinels cloaked in white, and the wind howled through the forest as though something ancient was calling. Inside the cabin, the world was quiet. The only sounds were the crackling of firewood and the soft rustling of Lila shifting beneath her quilt in the loft. Grace stood in the kitchen, her hands wrapped around a chipped ceramic mug, eyes watching the snow pile against the windows. She hadn't slept. Instead, she'd sat most of the night staring into the fire, wondering how they'd gotten here, not just to Silverpine, but to this brittle version of themselves. Ethan descended the stairs in thick socks and a thermal shirt, rubbing the back of his neck. "Forecast says this could be the worst storm of the season," he said, voice still hoarse from sleep. "State roads closed past Red Creek. How long do we have before we're snowed in?" Grace asked without turning. "Already are, probably." There was no accusation in her voice, no sarcasm, just fact. Grace Bennett wasn't the type to panic, but her jaw tightened slightly as she sipped her coffee. She had once thrived in moments of chaos, wrangling classrooms of 25 6-year-olds. But this kind of uncertainty, the wilderness, the silence, the ghosts of their past, unnerved her. Lila's face appeared at the edge of the loft. Her cheeks were flushed, hair tousled from sleep. "Is it still snowing?" "More than ever," Ethan replied, trying for cheerfulness. "We'll have to build an igloo just to get to the car." She giggled, then said, "Can we go out later? I want to see the trail by the big pine. Maybe Ranger left tracks." Ethan and Grace exchanged a look. Grace answered first. "Let's wait until the storm settles, honey. It's too dangerous right now." Lila pouted but nodded. She disappeared back into the loft. By noon, visibility had dropped to near zero. Snow piled halfway up the cabin's porch railing. The wind beat against the walls like fists. Grace busied herself making soup, while Ethan sat by the fire sorting through old memory cards, glancing occasionally at the photo on the mantel. That's when they noticed Lila was gone. At first, it was a quiet realization, no giggles, no footsteps from the loft. Grace called her name. No answer. She climbed the ladder and found the quilt undisturbed, the bed empty. "Ethan," her voice cracked. Ethan dropped the camera gear and ran to her side. His breath caught. The back door of the cabin creaked slightly on its hinges. Snow had blown in. Tiny boot prints led out into the blizzard. Grace's face turned white. No, no, no. She must have gone looking for Ranger, Ethan said, grabbing his parka from the hook. Call Frank. Tell him to call the sheriff. I'll follow her tracks. Grace's hands trembled as she reached for the phone. Outside, the world was reduced to whiteness. Ethan followed the footprints as best he could, but they were already filling in with new snow. Each step was a battle. His breath froze on his beard. He called her name, but the wind swallowed it. Back at the main lodge, Frank Wilson was already coordinating with the sheriff. Sheriff Jack Landry was a broad-shouldered man in his late 50s, with a mustache the color of ash and a weathered face etched with 30 winters in Silverpine. We've got a child missing in a blizzard, he barked into the radio. Mobilize the search and rescue. He turned to Grace. You said she went out looking for a dog. She thought she saw a ranger. Our old dog. A German shepherd. Lost him here 3 years ago. Frank, who was checking supplies, froze. A big shepherd with a notch in his ear. Grace's eyes widened. Yes. Why? I've seen him. Not often, but he's out there. Comes near the cabin sometimes, stays at the edge of the forest. Always alone. Sheriff Landry's brow furrowed. You're saying there's a feral shepherd living in these woods? He's not feral, Grace said firmly. If that's Ranger, he knows us. And if he finds her, he'll protect her. Meanwhile, deep in the forest, Lila sat beneath a pine tree, tears frozen to her cheeks. She had followed a shape, large, fast-moving, but lost it quickly in the swirl of snow. Her flashlight had died. Her jacket was soaked. She was starting to shake. A low sound cut through the wind. A whine. A figure emerged through the storm. Large. Furred. Amber eyes. Ranger, she whispered. The German shepherd stepped closer. Snow clung to his thick coat. One ear was notched. He sniffed the air, then nudged her gently with his nose. It is you, she whispered, crying anew. I knew you were here. He circled once, then began to dig furiously in the snow beside her. When the hollow was large enough, he nudged her inside and curled his body around her. The storm howled. But within the living shield of Ranger's fur, Lila finally stopped shaking. The blizzard had not relented. It was as if the mountains themselves had decided to test the resolve of every living thing below. In Silverpine, the trees groaned under the accumulating snow and the roads were nothing more than vague, winding memories beneath the white. Somewhere between the lodge and the forest's edge, Ethan stumbled through knee-deep drifts, flashlight beams catching on whirling flakes and branches crusted in frost. Back at the main cabin, Grace stood in a knot of people near the lodge's stone fireplace. Sheriff Jack Landry spoke briskly into his radio, dispatching volunteers. Frank Wilson paced nearby, now joined by a younger man in a weathered ranger jacket, Deputy Cody Nash. Cody was in his early 30s, lanky with a long stride and sharp green eyes that rarely missed detail. Originally from Wyoming, he had a quiet way of observing before speaking, and a reputation for being unnervingly calm under pressure. We've got snowmobiles ready at the service garage, Cody said. But they won't do much if we don't have a direction. Grace held up Lila's pink mitten, which Ethan had found near the cabin's threshold. Her voice cracked as she spoke. She's heading toward the forest. She was looking for Ranger. Cody nodded. Then that's where we start. Sheriff Landry turned to a woman who had just arrived, brushing snow off her parka. Dr. Eliza Rowan, the town's only veterinarian, was in her early 40s, compact with dark curly hair tied back in a no-nonsense bun. Her brown eyes scanned the room with clinical focus. I brought Tasha and Flint, she said, referring to the 2 rescue dogs she had raised and trained herself, both German shepherds. Flint was bulkier, calm and methodical, while Tasha, a lithe female with intense focus, was better suited for live scent trails. "We've got a kid out there," Sheriff Landry said. "Every minute counts." Back in the forest, the makeshift snow den had become a fragile bubble of warmth in the freezing world. Ranger's body blocked the wind, his slow breath sending up small clouds of warmth that misted against the snow cave walls. Lila, nestled beside him, had stopped crying. Her fingers curled into his fur. He was thinner than she remembered, his ribs faintly visible beneath his coat, but the strength of his presence was unchanged. "You stayed here," she murmured, her voice barely audible. "You waited." Ranger didn't respond. He only shifted slightly to ensure her legs were covered. He remembered the scent of her, milk and pine and laughter. The small hands that used to tug at his ears. The voice that called him with unfiltered joy. She was his pack. He had failed once. He would not fail again. In town, search parties were already setting out. Deputy Cody took charge of Grid North with Flint and 2 volunteers, Pete Halvorsen, a retired logger in his 60s, and Maya Chen, a recent transplant to Silverpine and outdoor guide. Maya was athletic, half Chinese, half native, with braided hair and sharp cheekbones that flushed red in the cold. She knew the trails well, and she had seen storms like this before. "If she's smart, and she is, she'll have stopped moving," Maya said. "Kids who run usually collapse quickly. If that dog's with her, he'll try to keep her warm." "Assuming it's really the same dog," Pete muttered. Cody didn't answer. He just checked the scent trail and pressed forward. Eliza took the south route with Tasha and 2 local ski patrollers. The snow was thick and covered all traces within minutes. Tasha circled frequently, confused by old fox tracks and blown-over brush. But then she barked once, sharp and clear, and veered toward a stand of younger pines. Back in the north, Cody and Flint reached a spot where the snow was disturbed, scooped shallow like something had burrowed. Flint pawed at the edges. Cody knelt, brushing snow aside. Underneath, a smooth indentation, fur pressed into the surface. A second, smaller form outlined beside it. She was here, he radioed. With a large dog. They made shelter. Grace's voice came crackling over the speaker. Then why would they leave it? Cody stood, brushing snow from his knees. Maya pointed to tracks leading away. They were straight, determined, not the erratic wandering of fear or panic. "Because the dog has a destination," Maya said. "Somewhere he believes is safer." Meanwhile, Ranger was slowing. His limbs ached from the cold, and the weight of the girl was growing harder to bear. But he trudged on, his mind focused on the old ranger hut he'd once sheltered in during a lightning storm 2 winters ago. It had 4 stone walls, a partial roof, and a broken window, but it was better than snow and wind. He sensed predators earlier, coyotes maybe. They had followed from a distance but were wary of his scent. Still, he couldn't let them near the pup. He carried her as long as he could, then nudged her awake. "Not far," Lila murmured, eyes fluttering. Ranger nosed her gently until she sat up again, shivering. He let her lean against him as they crossed a gully and entered a thicket where wind couldn't reach. Then, there it was, the ranger hut. Half buried in snow but intact. He pushed the door open with his shoulder, guided her inside, and let her curl beside the old fire pit. He lay down against her, too exhausted to do more. Far away, Ethan collapsed near the edge of a frozen stream, flashlight beam flickering. His knees buckled in the snow. Sheriff Landry caught up, out of breath. Ethan looked up with hollow eyes. "I can't find her." Landry gripped his arm. "We will. Your girl's strong. And if that dog's really yours, then she's not alone." The morning sun had not yet risen, but the first pale light of dawn seeped through the heavy clouds like a whispered promise. The storm had lessened, no longer howling but murmuring, wind brushing snow-laden boughs with a gentler hand. In the ranger hut deep within the forest, Ranger stirred. He ached. Every joint in his body screamed with fatigue, but he kept his frame curled tightly around Lila. She was still, her breath light against the frosted collar of his neck. The interior of the hut had warmed slightly overnight due to their shared body heat, but frost still coated the broken window panes, and the fire pit remained cold. Ranger shifted only when the girl let out a small moan and rolled closer into his warmth. Outside, the forest was stirring. At the edge of the ridge that overlooked the north ravine, a figure appeared, Maya Chen. Her braided hair was now caked with snow and sweat. She walked with long, silent strides, the muscles in her legs burning from hours of movement. Behind her, Deputy Cody and Flint advanced methodically, checking branches and old prints. Flint suddenly stopped and pawed at a snowbank. Cody knelt beside the dog. "What is it, boy?" he asked. Flint sniffed again and barked once, low and certain. Cody called it in. "We've got tracks again. Large dog, human footprints, small. Still going northeast. They're not wandering." Back at the lodge, Grace and Ethan stood in the snow-covered courtyard, now serving as base camp. A generator hummed in the background, powering radio towers and floodlights. Grace was wrapped in one of Frank's spare parkas. Her eyes were red-rimmed but determined. Eliza, the veterinarian, approached with Tasha, who was still searching the southern perimeter. "If they stayed overnight," Eliza said softly, "and the dog is truly hers, they'll be near shelter. Some place the dog remembers." Ethan paced, muttering to himself. He thought back to the years he'd hiked these woods with Ranger, how the dog had once bolted into a thicket and disappeared for hours, only to return with paws muddy and sides flecked with ash. He stopped suddenly. "There was a hut," he said aloud. "An old ranger shelter, north of Blue Pine Ridge. Ranger found it once. It's half buried in moss and stone." Grace looked up sharply. Could he remember it after 3 years? If anyone could, it's him. They relayed the theory to Sheriff Landry, who immediately redirected search teams. Maya and Cody adjusted course toward Blue Pine Ridge. The terrain was steep, with sections hidden under drifted snow. As they neared the elevation gain, Maya noticed branches broken unnaturally, a path cleared. Cody found a snag of pink fleece on a pine. Inside the hut, Lila stirred. Her cheeks were flushed now, and Ranger, sensing her discomfort, licked her forehead. She blinked, groggy. "Are we safe here, Ranger?" she asked. Ranger nudged her hand with his snout, and she giggled weakly. Then her stomach growled. She sat up, teeth chattering. "I'm really hungry. Do you think Daddy brought pancakes?" Ranger stood and stretched, his limbs trembling slightly. He padded to the door, pushing it ajar. The world outside was blinding white. He sniffed the air, predators had passed through but were long gone. Still, his instincts flared. He trotted back and nudged Lila's arm. "Okay," she said, wobbling to her feet. "We can try to find them. I can walk a little." Back at Blue Pine Ridge, Maya caught the glint of something metallic through the trees. Cody lifted his binoculars. "Old stone walls. That has to be it." They picked up pace, Flint barking with rising excitement. As they crested the final slope, Cody raised a hand. "Hold. Movement." A shadow exited the hut, large, limping slightly. It was Ranger. His head lifted. Amber eyes locked onto them. A soft growl started deep in his chest. "It's okay," Cody said, crouching. "We're here to help." Ranger didn't retreat. He stood firm, as if gauging their threat. Then Lila stepped out from behind him. Her cheeks were pale, but she stood tall, one hand gripping Ranger's scruff. "They're friends," she said. Ranger's growl ceased. Maya exhaled. That's our girl. Cody stepped forward, radioing in. We've got them. Both alive. Send in medical. Back at the lodge, Grace collapsed to her knees, tears falling. Ethan wrapped his arms around her, forehead resting on hers. Sheriff Landry's voice over the radio confirmed what they had hoped for but dared not expect. Lila was safe. The sound of rotor blades thumped rhythmically in the sky, growing louder by the second. A medevac helicopter emerged from the south, its searchlight slicing through the morning mist like a divine sword. Snow scattered across the treetops as it descended toward the makeshift clearing near the ranger hut. Below, Cody waved in the signal, his fluorescent vest barely visible in the wan light. Grace and Ethan, breathless from their uphill trek with the response team, stumbled into view just as the skids touched down. Ranger stood motionless at Lila's side, not even flinching as the wind tore at his fur. Lila leaned on him, eyes fluttering with exhaustion but filled with recognition when she saw her parents running through the powdery snow. Daddy! Mommy! Grace fell to her knees, gathering Lila in her arms, crying so hard her shoulders shook. Ethan wrapped around both of them, pressing kisses into Lila's tangled hair. For a long, sacred moment, they knelt in the snow as if in prayer. Ranger stood just behind, his body lowered but alert, as if still unsure it was safe to rest. Eliza Rowan, wrapped in an insulated parka and carrying a med kit, approached quietly. She crouched by Ranger, examining the scrapes along his legs, the bruised pads of his paws, and the open gash along his left shoulder. "You incredible beast," she whispered, before turning toward the girl. "We need to get her inside. She's stable but hypothermic." A stretcher was prepared. EMTs, one young, freckled man named Saul and a sharp-eyed woman named Doreen, quickly bundled Lila in a thermal wrap. As she was lifted, her hand reached blindly. "Ranger. He's coming with us," Grace said firmly. Eliza looked at Ethan. "We'll need to bring him in separately. His body's taken a toll." Ranger didn't resist as Eliza slipped a padded sling around his midsection. With Ethan's help, they lifted him into the rear compartment of a snowmobile, then raced toward the lodge where a triage center had been set up. The helicopter carried Lila first, straight to St. Helens Medical Center. Back at the lodge, the snow had slowed to a whisper. Inside the fire-warmed atrium, volunteers and rangers cleared tables for medical equipment. Ranger was laid out on a thermal blanket. Eliza examined his vitals while Ethan sat nearby, watching every movement. "Will he be okay?" Ethan asked. Eliza paused, one hand on Ranger's ribcage. "He's tough. But this wasn't just one night. His old wounds suggest a long time surviving alone. Malnourished. He has scar tissue from what looks like a bullet graze." "Did you know about that?" Ethan shook his head, stunned. Grace returned later, having watched Lila's airlift. Her expression was softer now, worry giving way to weary admiration. She joined Ethan by Ranger's side. "He stayed with her all night," she murmured. 3 years away and he still came back when she needed him." Ethan swallowed. Maybe he never really left. Meanwhile, Cody and Maya stood outside near the clearing's edge. Maya was sipping coffee from a thermos, her hands trembling from fatigue and adrenaline. Cody watched the treetops. "You think someone shot at that dog?" she asked. Cody nodded. "Too clean a scar for a fall. Could have been a hunter. Or someone who wanted him gone." Maya shook her head. "He protected that kid like she was his own." Later that day, Frank Wilson joined them. He was wiping snow from his beard and adjusting his thermal gloves. "There's talk in town already. They're calling him the ghost of Silverpine." Cody cracked a small smile. "More like the Guardian." By late afternoon, news stations had picked up the story. A local reporter, Diana Marks, mid-30s, blunt haircut, intense eyes, interviewed Grace outside the lodge. Diana had a reputation for finding the heart in a story and wasn't above wading through snowbanks to do it. "How did you feel," she asked, "when you saw your daughter alive?" Grace hesitated, glancing at the ridge where it all happened. "Like I had been granted a second chance." "And the dog?" Grace turned to Ranger, now resting inside beside a space heater, his eyes half-lidded but watchful. "He gave that to us." By the next morning, Silverpine awoke beneath skies brushed with pale blue and bands of sun warming the freshly fallen snow. Birds chirped cautiously. Roofs bore the weight of frost, but the air held the promise of thaw. Inside the lodge, the fire had never gone out. It roared now, chasing the damp chill from every crevice. On a wool blanket beside the hearth, Ranger slept curled tightly, his chest rising and falling steadily. Grace sat nearby, notebook in hand. Ethan was dozing in a chair, his arm draped across the back like he feared waking to find it all a dream. Sheriff Landry entered quietly, his boots crunching faintly on the wooden floor. "Hospital called," he said. "Lila's stable. Eating now. Asking for pancakes." Grace smiled through tears. "Of course she is." She also asked if Ranger could come see her. Ethan sat up. "Is that allowed?" Landry shrugged. "They're making an exception. Media's all over this. The girl, the blizzard, the dog that saved her. Every reporter between Denver and Boise is calling." Later that afternoon, a small van provided by the veterinary clinic carried Ranger, wrapped snugly in a soft crate with Eliza riding alongside, down to St. Helens Medical. Grace and Ethan followed behind. Lila's room was a bright corner with snowflakes painted on the window. As they wheeled Ranger in, the girl lit up like sunrise. "Ranger." The dog raised his head. His body was still sore, but the voice called to something deep inside him. Lila reached from the bed, arms open. Carefully, Eliza helped guide Ranger forward. He rested his chin on the edge of her blanket and closed his eyes. Lila pressed her cheek to his skull. "You came home." The image was too powerful to ignore. One of the nurses snapped a photo. By evening, it was circulating online, under the caption, "A Shepherd's Promise." Meanwhile, in Silverpine, Diana Marks aired her report, "A lost dog, thought dead, returns in a blizzard to protect the child who once called him family." Some say it's instinct. Others say it's something greater. As the town watched, neighbors came forward, offering supplies, blankets, even a mural in the town square. The mayor, a soft-spoken man named Curtis Hollings, visited the Bennett home the next day. He was in his late 50s, with a potbelly and glasses always slipping off his nose, but a heart as big as the Rockies. "We'd like to recognize your dog," he told Grace and Ethan. Formally. And so, under a rare winter sun, the town of Silverpine gathered. Children clutched hot cocoa. Locals wore scarves in school colors. A platform was set up near the fire station, and Ranger, still bandaged but walking, was led up beside Lila, who now stood with a walker, grinning. Mayor Hollings raised his voice. "This town knows how to brave storms. But sometimes it's not the strongest hands that lead us, it's the quiet loyalty of those we almost forgot." He turned to the dog. "Ranger, today you're not just a hero. You're a citizen of Silverpine." The crowd erupted in cheers. Ranger wagged his tail. Lila hugged him tight. Back at the Bennett home that evening, the family gathered by the fire again. Grace served pancakes, Lila's request. Eliza joined them, sipping cider. Cody and Maya stopped by, bringing Ranger a new collar engraved with his name. Grace looked out the window toward the woods. "Do you think he remembers everything?" Ethan nodded. "Not just remembers. He came back because he chose us." Lila placed her pancake carefully in front of Ranger, who waited patiently. "You're not just my dog," she whispered. "You're my guardian." And in that moment, all was quiet. Outside, the snow began again, but this time, softly. As if the world, too, was offering thanks. The snows of Silverpine thinned with the lengthening days. By late March, the evergreens held less burden, and meltwater trickled through the ridges like soft music. Ranger's limp had eased. Though his gait still bore the memory of old wounds, he moved with new steadiness, especially beside Lila, who now walked unaided, save for the occasional guiding hand of her parents. In the week since the blizzard, Silverpine had changed. Muralists painted the fire station wall with a scene of a dark-furred shepherd standing over a child beneath stars. Tourists arrived, not in floods, but as a gentle stream, drawn by the story of the dog who found his way home. The Bennett family, once scattered emotionally and physically, had begun to rebuild. Grace had cut back on her remote work hours. Ethan, after speaking with Landry and Maya, signed up for part-time work as a wilderness guide, determined to give back to the landscape that had once taken so much and then returned it all. At the center of it, always, was Ranger. One Sunday, they hiked together up the trail behind their home, a ridge that led to a bluff overlooking the whole valley. It had been Lila's idea. She wanted to show Ranger his mountain, she'd said. He followed her without hesitation, tail swaying. At the top, the wind was cool, but gentle. Lila pointed across the treetops. "That's where you brought me," she said. "When everyone else thought I was gone." Grace put a hand on Ethan's arm. He pulled her closer. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Lila turned and looked at Ranger. "Are you going to leave again?" Ranger didn't move, only sat down at her feet and looked up. His eyes were soft, gold-flecked in the light. Ethan answered for him. "No. He found his way back once. He's not going anywhere again." Later that evening, as twilight deepened, Sheriff Landry paid a quiet visit. He brought something wrapped in cloth. "A friend of mine at the K-9 division sent this," he said. "Said it was only right." Inside was a medallion, a small silver badge engraved with the words, "Service, Loyalty, Courage." On the back, simply, "Ranger, Guardian of Silverpine." Lila's eyes welled with tears. She walked over and clipped it to Ranger's new collar. "He's not just a pet," she whispered. "He's our history." That night, while the town settled into sleep, Ranger stood alone for a moment at the back porch. He watched the trees sway. His ears twitched as he listened, for owls, for wind, for the stillness that had once been his only companion. But now, inside, laughter spilled from a warm house. And when Lila's voice called his name, he turned without pause. And walked home. Sometimes, what we believe to be lost is simply waiting for the right moment to return. Ranger didn't need to be asked, he knew where he belonged, and who needed him most. Through the coldest storms and the longest silences, loyalty can become a language of its own. May we all find the strength to return for those we love. And if you believe in second chances, in quiet miracles, and in the healing power of love, share this story, leave a comment, and subscribe. May God bless every wandering heart still searching for home.